My granddaughter laughed, actually laughed, at the sound of my heart monitor. Beside her, my daughter just sat there, adjusting her coat, saying nothing. I wasn't family to them anymore, I was just a wallet with a pulse. After decades of sacrifice, that's what I'd become optional. That was the moment I made my choice. They wouldn't hear another beep, but they'd feel the silence I left behind. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The steady blip of the heart monitor filled the small hospital room, a metronome for Evelyn Carson's breathing. Afternoon light slanted through the blinds, striping her thin blanket with gold. She sat propped against a bank of pillows, IV tubing running to the crook of her arm, the faint scent of antiseptic lingering over the muted scent of her own lavender hand cream. It had been a mild episode, the doctor assured her, nothing more than a reminder to slow down. But she could already feel the unspoken shift, how people looked at you differently once you'd been in one of these beds. The door swung open without a knock. Laura stepped in first, her coat half-sipped, hair wind-blown from the February gusts off Lake Mendota. Megan trailed behind, phone in hand, thumbs flying. Her boots squeaked faintly on the polished linoleum as she claimed the visitor chair, never glancing up. Laura pulled the other chair closer to the bed and offered a polite smile that didn't quite meet her eyes. "You look better than I expected," Laura said, as if bracing for Evie to fall apart in front of her. "I feel fine," Evie replied, voice steady. A beep from the monitor punctuated her words, clear, even, harmless. Megan's gaze flicked up at last. She smirked, tilted her head and began to mimic the sound in a sing-song tone. "Beep, beep, beep," she chanted, drawing out the last note like a bad punchline. Laura's mouth twitched into an uncomfortable laugh. "Oh, Megan," she said, but the correction never came. She shifted in her seat and smoothed her coat, eyes sliding away, as if the moment would vanish if she didn't look at it. Evie didn't speak. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, though not from amusement. She simply let the sound sink in, the image burn into memory. Megan's smirk, Laura's indulgence, the flat, fluorescent light overhead, making both of them look pale and careless. The conversation drifted toward campus gossip, professors Megan didn't like, and a new coffee shop opening near the student union. Evie nodded when required, but her mind was already somewhere else, calculating dates, recalling numbers. Her fingers rested lightly on the blanket, the pulse in her wrist matching the machine's rhythm. When they finally left, Laura promising to check in tomorrow, Evie exhaled, the room suddenly warmer in their absence. The monitor kept its vigil beside her, each beep now a metered reminder that she was still in control of her life, her choices, and the levers she could pull when respect was missing. The next visitor came with a brisk knock. Janice Riley, bundled in a heavy navy peacoat, stepped inside with the energy of someone who never believed hospitals were places for quiet. She carried a tote bag with a crossword book peeking out, and the faint scent of winter air clung to her scarf. "Good Lord, Evie, you've still got more color in your cheeks than I do," Janice said, plopping into the visitor chair without ceremony. She leaned in, eyeing the monitor. "So what happened?" "Hart just wanted a little attention," Evie chuckled softly, then told her. Not the medical details, they were already boring, but the visit, the beeping, Megan's mimicry, Laura's weak laugh. She recited it evenly, like reading from a chart, but her eyes narrowed just enough for Janice to catch the edge beneath the calm. Janice sat back, lips pursed. "She actually did that. Right in front of you?" "Right in front of me," Evie said, sipping a small cup of hospital water as though she had all the time in the world. "Unbelievable." Janice shook her head, her silver hair catching the light. Then, as if remembering something delicious, she tilted her head and asked, "Don't you still pay for her college?" The monitor gave another polite beep. Evie's hand stilled on the blanket. Outside the window, wind rattled the bare branches against the glass. Her answer didn't come, not yet. But a slow, knowing smile curved her lips, one Janice had seen before, years ago when they'd worked the night shift and a doctor underestimated them. It was the look of someone who had just decided on a course of action, and there'd be no steering her off it. The morning after her discharge, Evelyn Carson moved slowly through her craftsman-style home, the scent of fresh coffee curling up from the kitchen. Outside, the lake was a sheet of pewter under a gray February sky, the ice at the edges cracking like distant gunshots. She set her mug beside the polished oak desk in the study, a room where every drawer had its place and every paper was squared in neat stacks. She switched on the desk lamp, the warm light spilling over a leather-bound ledger and a row of labeled file folders. Her fingers traced the tabs until she found the one marked Education Trust. The folder was thick, years of bank statements and notarized documents clipped neatly. She slid into her chair, the familiar creak of the leather comforting in its constancy. Inside, the figures told the story she already knew but hadn't looked at closely in a while. A trust she'd established when Megan was still in middle school, meant to carry her straight through college with no debt. Evie's own nursing shifts and careful investments had made it possible. She'd watched the balance shrink semester by semester, each payment a quiet gift never acknowledged beyond a cursory thanks in a text. She adjusted her reading glasses and studied the latest statement. 2 years left, 8 more tuition payments scheduled, each one neatly marked with dates she could change. The monitor beeps from the hospital seemed to echo in her mind, syncing with the slow ticking of the mantel clock in the next room. Evie reached for the phone, her decision so settled in her mind, it felt like she'd already made it years ago. Martin Keller's office, came the smooth voice on the other end. "Martin, it's Evie Carson," she said. "I need to talk about Megan's education fund." Within minutes, Martin himself was on the line, his voice warm but tinged with the curiosity of a man who knew Evie didn't call without purpose. "Everything all right with her tuition?" "For now," Evie said, flipping through the statements, "but I'd like to discuss alternatives." "Alternatives?" She leaned back in her chair, letting the wood creak. "If the beneficiary were to be removed, what happens to the remaining funds?" Martin paused. She could almost hear the smile in his voice. "Evie, you've always had full control. If Megan isn't the beneficiary, you can reassign the funds anywhere, family, charity, or back to your estate. There's no obligation to keep her on." The corner of Evie's mouth lifted. She turned her gaze to the lake, where a lone ice fisherman hunched over a small hole in the frozen surface. "And I can do this before the next payment." "You can do it today," Martin replied. "Redirect the funds before the next semester's tuition posts, and the university will simply send her a bill instead." Evie imagined Megan opening that bill confused, maybe angry. But she also imagined a different scene, a nursing student in a crisp uniform, someone who worked double shifts like she once had, opening a letter that said paid in full. The thought warmed her more than the coffee. Martin cleared his throat. "I'll need your signature, but otherwise it's straightforward. Shall I prepare the paperwork?" Evie swiveled her chair back to the desk, pulled a pen from the holder, and twirled it slowly between her fingers. "Yes, Martin. Prepare it." There was a brief silence on the line, the kind of pause between two people who both understood something had shifted. "You realize," he said finally, "you can pull the plug on the next semester right now." The next morning, frost clung to the bare branches along East Washington Avenue, catching the sunlight like shards of glass. Evelyn Carson's breath fogged in the air as she stepped from her car in front of a sandstone building just a few blocks from the Capitol. Martin Keller's brass nameplate gleamed beside the heavy oak door, a quiet promise that serious matters were settled here. Inside, the faint scent of polished wood and leather mixed with the whisper of paper being filed. Martin's receptionist, efficient, polite, the kind who could spot an unannounced visitor a mile away, rose and offered a warm nod. "Mrs. Carson, he's expecting you." Martin's office was a study in quiet authority, walls lined with law books, deep green carpet muffling footsteps, and a view of the Capitol dome through tall windows. He rose from behind his desk, his gray suit perfectly pressed, his handshake firm. "Evie," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite him, "let's make this official." She settled in, sliding her purse to the floor. "I don't want there to be any delay." she said. There won't be. He opened a slim folder, the papers inside crisp and smelling faintly of fresh toner. First, this removes Megan Carson as the named beneficiary on the Education Trust. The pen felt cool in her hand as she signed, the sound of the nib scratching across paper oddly satisfying. Second, he continued, sliding another document forward. This reassigns the remaining balance to a dedicated nursing scholarship fund at the University of Wisconsin. We'll structure it so it begins awarding immediately, meaning students can receive support this semester. Evie's eyes moved over the printed lines. In honor of Evelyn M. Carson, RN retired. A quiet pride stirred beneath her ribs. She signed again, the pen stroke smooth and deliberate. Martin gathered the pages, clipped them neatly, and set them aside. Once I file this with the trust manager and notify the bank, the funds will be redirected before the university processes its next billing cycle. She met his gaze. How soon before Megan notices? He smiled faintly, likely the moment her next bill arrives. Outside, the wind funneled down the street, rattling the glass panes. For the first time since the hospital, Evie felt her pulse steady, her heart working in its own quiet rhythm, no machine to echo it back to her. When the meeting ended, she stepped into the bright midday sun, the Capitol's white dome stark against the blue sky. Across the street, Janice leaned on her cane beside her sedan, a grin already forming. "Well?" Janice asked. "Well," Evie replied, "it's done." They drove to a corner diner where the doorbell jingled, and the air was thick with the smell of cinnamon and frying bacon. Janice insisted they order the biggest slices of pie on the menu. Pecan for Evie, cherry for herself. "To new beginnings," Janice said, raising her fork like a toast. Evie laughed softly, savoring the sweetness and the quiet satisfaction of a plan set in motion. By the time she returned home, the lake had taken on a pinkish hue under the setting sun. The house was still, the only sound the ticking of the old mantel clock. She hung her coat, set her purse down, and reached for the phone to check messages. One blinked red. She pressed play. "Mrs. Carson, this is Clara Jennings from the credit union. I wanted to confirm that the tuition auto-pay linked to the Education Trust has been canceled. If that wasn't your intention, please call me back immediately." Evie stood in the dimming light, the corners of her mouth lifting into a slow, deliberate smile. The first ping came at 8:14 a.m., a sharp little sound that sliced through the quiet of Megan Carson's dorm room. She reached for her phone with one hand while still half buried under her comforter. A subject line glared back at her, "You are Gent, tuition payment overdue." Her eyes narrowed as she tapped it open. The email was painfully clear. Her account showed an unpaid balance for the spring semester. Late fee pending. Payment required immediately to avoid registration holds. By the second reading, her face had gone blotchy with heat. She shoved off the blanket, grabbed her hoodie from the chair, and paced the narrow floor. 10 minutes later, Evelyn Carson's landline rang. She had been in the kitchen, folding a dish towel, the smell of fresh coffee still hanging in the air. She picked up on the third ring. "Grandma," Megan snapped, skipping hello, "I just got an email from the university saying my tuition's unpaid. Did you forget to?" Evie let the pause stretch, a soft hum in her voice. "That's strange. Must be a billing error. You'll want to call them and get it straightened out." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "I thought you called them, Megan," Evie said, her tone level. "They'll explain." The click when Megan hung up was more of a slam. An hour later the phone rang again. This time it was Laura, voice tight, clipped, the way it got when she'd been pulled into something she didn't want to deal with. "Mom, what's going on?" "Megan says the school sent her an overdue notice." Evie kept her gaze on the lake outside her window, where the wind was pushing thin sheets of ice against the shoreline with a hollow scraping sound. "I told her to call the university. Did you cancel the payment?" "Laura," Evie said gently, "why would you think that?" Her daughter's exhale was sharp enough to sting through the line. "Because the auto-pay isn't showing up in her account. She's panicking." From the living room doorway, Janice appeared, holding 2 mugs of tea. She raised her brows in silent question. Evie pressed the phone to her shoulder and mouthed, "Megan." Janice's eyes lit with a fox-like glint. She mouthed back, "Perfect." Evie returned her attention to the call. "If it's a mistake, the school will fix it. Megan's an adult, she can handle a phone call." Laura muttered something about making things harder than they need to be before hanging up. The rest of the afternoon passed in a comfortable hush. The snow outside had thickened, softening the lines of the houses along the lake. After dinner, Evie settled onto her porch, wrapped in a thick knit throw, a steaming cup of tea between her hands. The air was cold enough to sting her cheeks, but she liked it that way. It kept her alert, grounded. Across the water, the lights of downtown glimmered faintly, blurred by the falling snow. The only sound was the slow lap of ice shards against the dock pilings and the occasional creak of the porch boards under her chair. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. The screen showed Martin Keller. "Evening, Martin," she answered, her voice carrying the calm of someone already certain of the news. "All paperwork's gone through," he said. "The scholarship account is active, and the university is processing it as we speak. First awards will be disbursed this week." Evie took a slow sip of her tea, the steam curling into the frosty air. Somewhere in the city, Megan was staring at an unpaid bill. Somewhere else, a nursing student would soon get a letter saying their semester was covered. Martin's voice came again, faintly amused. "Which means the tuition Megan thought was hers is already in someone else's hands." Evie smiled into the dark. "Good." The post went live at 9:03 a.m. On the University of Wisconsin's student news page, an unassuming headline in bold red, "New Nursing Scholarship, established in honor of local retired RN." Beneath it, a smiling photo of Evelyn Carson, taken just a week before her hospital stay. Her hair was neat, her sweater the color of lake ice under a pale sky, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The accompanying paragraph explained that the Evelyn M. Carson Nursing Scholarship would provide immediate aid to qualifying students beginning this semester. The funds were generously endowed by Mrs. Carson to honor the dedication and service of future healthcare professionals. At 9:11, Megan saw it. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd been scrolling through campus announcements between classes, hoping to find distraction from the fact her tuition account was still glaring at her with a red overdue banner. The sight of her grandmother's name stopped her mid-scroll. She clicked. She read. She read again. By the third reading, her pulse thudded in her ears. The dollar figure listed in the article wasn't exact, but she knew that number. She'd heard Laura talk about the education trust for years. It was her tuition money. Money now going to strangers. Her chair scraped loudly as she stood, earning a side-eye from her roommate. Megan grabbed her phone, stabbing at the screen until Evie's number lit up. Evie was in her kitchen, rinsing blueberries for a late breakfast. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon from the toast cooling on the counter. When the phone rang, she answered on the third ring. "Grandma." Megan's voice was already high, already cracking. "What the hell is this?" Evie blinked at the window, watching a gull wheel low over the frozen lake. "Good morning, Megan." "No, don't good morning me. I just saw the university post about your scholarship. That's my tuition money. You gave it to a bunch of random nursing students." Evie placed the bowl of blueberries on the counter. Her voice stayed even, almost gentle. "Some things go to those who appreciate them. You're insane. You can't just..." But Evie had already decided she wasn't going to let Megan's panic become her problem. "I think you'll find the university's financial aid office is open until 5, she said. "Best of luck." There was a sputtering sound on the other end, then the sharp, satisfying click of Megan hanging up. From the doorway, Janice, who had been halfway through pouring herself a cup of coffee, clapped slowly. "And that," she said, "is how you deliver a life lesson without breaking a sweat." Evie allowed herself a small smile before taking a bite of toast. The house settled into quiet again, broken only by the occasional creak of the old heating system and the faint chatter of a talk radio station playing in the next room. She'd barely finished her breakfast when the phone rang again. The caller ID showed Clara Jennings, Credit Union. Evie picked up, her mind already curious. "Morning, Evie," Clara said, her tone low. "Careful. You should know. Megan came in this morning to apply for a private student loan. She seemed desperate. Said she needed to cover her spring tuition immediately." Evie arched an eyebrow, though Clara couldn't see it. "And I thought you'd want to know before she finds out what I already told her," Clara said. Evie leaned against the counter, waiting. "She's not going to get it, Evie. Her credit history won't clear the first hurdle." Evie's smile was slow, deliberate. "Good to know." Clara's voice had that quiet, measured tone people used when they knew their words would sting. "She didn't make it past the first round of review," she told Evie over the phone. "The bank flagged 3 missed credit card payments, a maxed-out store account, and well, let's just say the computer didn't even kick it to a human underwriter." Evie stood at her kitchen counter, steam curling from the kettle. "I imagine she wasn't pleased." "She left here in a hurry," Clara said delicately. "And by hurry I mean she nearly knocked over the lobby ficus on her way out." Evie allowed herself the smallest of smiles. "Thank you for letting me know, Clara." By that evening the fallout had begun to spread in the way only bad news does, fast and messy. Megan's Instagram story flashed in shaky text over a photo of her half-empty coffee cup. "Apparently hard work means nothing when banks only care about your stupid credit score." Her next post was a black square with white letters. "Guess some people would rather watch you drown than toss you a rope." Evie didn't follow her granddaughter on social media, but Janice did, and she read the captions aloud over tea the next morning. "She's got a flair for drama," Janice said. "Shame it doesn't pay tuition." The phone rang just before noon. Laura's voice came through tight, almost rehearsed. "Mom, I think this has gone far enough. She's under a lot of pressure. Just for 1 semester. Cover it, and we can sort the rest out later." Evie moved to the window, the late winter light bouncing off the frozen lake. "No, Laura. It's not like she's asking for a car or a trip. This is her education. She's asking for a safety net she hasn't earned." Evie replied evenly. "And if she's going to learn to stand on her own, she needs to know what it feels like to balance without one." Laura went silent, then sighed sharply. "You can be incredibly stubborn, you know that." "I've heard," Evie said, and ended the call before her daughter could shift into guilt mode. That afternoon, Janice arrived with a box of fresh stationery and a bag of lemon bars from the bakery. "You said you wanted to thank the scholarship students. Let's do it properly." They sat at the dining table, the smell of lemon sugar mingling with the faint wood polish from the table's surface. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily past the window. Evie dipped her pen into the inkwell, her handwriting looping across thick cream paper. "Congratulations on being awarded the Evelyn M. Carson Nursing Scholarship. Your dedication to this profession is exactly what the world needs." One letter became 3, then 10. Each name brought her a little jolt of satisfaction, proof that the money was in hands that would respect it. When they finished, Janice leaned back with a sigh. "Feels better than writing checks to someone who calls you stingy behind your back, doesn't it?" Evie's lips curved into a quiet smile. "It does." The evening came early, shadows stretching across the lake as the sun slipped behind the tree line. Evie was tidying the dining room when the phone rang again. The caller ID read Martin Keller. "Evening, Martin," she greeted, expecting routine business, but his voice was sharper than usual. "Evie, I thought you should know. Megan's been trying to access the trust account through your daughter. She's claiming she needs the paperwork for record keeping, but it's obvious she's fishing for access." Evie's hand stilled on the tablecloth. "And Laura, she hasn't given her anything yet. But I'd watch this closely." The kettle clicked off in the kitchen, the hiss of steam filling the silence between them. Martin's voice was calm but certain when he called the next morning. "All accounts are secure, Evie. I checked personally. There's no way Megan can touch the trust. It's closed, legally and permanently." Evie stood at her kitchen window, watching a thin mist rise off the lake as the ice began to break in patches. "Good," she said, the word measured, deliberate. That door needed closing. Not 2 hours later her phone lit up again. This time it was Megan, and she didn't waste time with greetings. I need access to my education fund. I know you took me off, but you can put me back on. Just tell Martin it was a misunderstanding. Evie moved to her armchair, settling in as though for a long conversation, though she had no intention of giving her granddaughter what she wanted. There's nothing to access. The trust is closed. That's ridiculous. Megan shot back. You're my grandmother. This is supposed to be for me. It was for you, Evie said evenly. And now it isn't. There was a pause, just long enough for the hurt to slip into Megan's voice. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I think you'll find, Evie replied, that life has a way of doing that all on its own. The next call came from Laura. She didn't bother with preamble either. Mom, I just talked to Megan. She's right. You're making things harder than they need to be. She's under enough stress without you slamming doors in her face. Evie picked up a lemon bar. Janice had left the night before, took a bite, and let the powdered sugar dust her fingers before she answered. The trust isn't a revolving door, Laura. It's closed. She'll figure something else out. That's easy for you to say. You've never had to juggle classes and bills like she has. Evie's laugh was short and quiet. I worked double shifts as a nurse while raising you, Laura. I know exactly what it's like to juggle. Her daughter's silence was pointed, but Evie didn't fill it. When Laura finally sighed and muttered, "Fine," before hanging up, Evie set the lemon bar down and brushed the sugar from her hands. Janice arrived a few minutes later, her coat dotted with melting snowflakes. "You look like you could use a change of scenery," she said. Farmer's market. The suggestion was so out of step with the tension of the morning that Evie almost laughed. Why not? The air downtown was sharp, with the smell of roasting coffee beans from a nearby cafe. Stalls lined the street, bright with early tulips, jars of golden honey, and baskets of fresh bread. Evie let herself wander, trailing a hand over the petals of a vase of pink peonies. "These are coming home with me," she told the vendor, tucking the bouquet into the crook of her arm. The blooms were cool against her sweater, their scent clean and faintly sweet. By the time she returned home, the kitchen was brighter with the flowers in a glass vase on the table. She'd just settled into the quiet when her phone buzzed again. "Clara Jennings, Credit Union." "Evie," Clara began carefully, "I thought you should know, Megan came in today and tried to co-sign a loan application, using your name." Evie's hand tightened on the phone. "My name?" "Yes. She claimed she had your permission. Of course we didn't process it without verification." Clara's tone carried the unspoken. I didn't believe her for a second. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches against the window. Inside, the silence sharpened. Clara's voice was sharper than Evie had ever heard it. "It wasn't just an attempt, Evie. She actually signed your name on the application." Evie sat at her kitchen table, fingertips resting lightly on the cool porcelain of her coffee mug. The peonies from the market had begun to open wide, their scent faintly sweet in the still air. "You're certain?" "Clear as day," Clara replied. "Same looping E, same slant on the C. She must have copied it off something you'd signed before." But the handwriting was just off enough for the fraud department to flag it. The weight of those words didn't anger Evie. It chilled her. She reached for her phone with deliberate calm. "Thank you, Clara. Leave it with me." The second the line went dead, she punched in Martin Keller's number. He picked up on the first ring. "Evie, what's happened?" She didn't waste time. "Megan forged my signature on a co-signed loan application." Clara caught it before it went anywhere. A pause. "All right," Martin said, his voice taking on the crisp, efficient tone she remembered from the years he'd handled malpractice disputes for the hospital. "We'll address this properly. A formal warning letter, registered mail, signature required. It will make clear that any further attempt will result in criminal charges." "I want it strong," Evie said. "It will be." 2 hours later, Martin's assistant called to confirm the letter was ready. Evie imagined Megan's face when the envelope arrived. Heavy stock, official letterhead, the kind of paper that made your palms sweat before you even read the first line. But before the envelope could even leave Martin's office, Laura was on the phone. Her voice was tight, teetering between pleading and scolding. "Mom," She's scared. She made a bad choice, but dragging lawyers into it is too much. She forged my name, Laura, Evie said flatly. She's desperate. You've backed her into a corner. Evie cut her off. She's 20 years old, not 6. Desperation doesn't excuse fraud. On the couch beside her, Janice crossed her arms and shook her head. No consequences, no lessons, she said loud enough for Laura to hear through the receiver. Laura bristled. I can't believe you're okay with humiliating your granddaughter like this. Evie's gaze slid to Janice, who raised her brows as if to say, well, I am okay with it, Evie said finally, because maybe humiliation will succeed where kindness failed. There was a click, sharp and final. Later that afternoon, Martin called again to confirm the letter had been sent. Evie sat with Janice in the living room, the two of them sipping tea as snow began to dust the edge of the porch. She'll rage, Janice predicted, but she won't try it again. Evie stirred her tea, the spoon chiming against the porcelain. Let's hope. That evening, as the house settled into quiet, Evie's landline rang once more. The caller ID showed unknown. She considered letting it go to voicemail, but habit won. This is Evelyn Carson. A bright, clipped voice answered. Mrs. Carson, this is the billing department at the University of Wisconsin. We're trying to reach your granddaughter, Megan Carson, regarding an overdue tuition balance. We've been unable to get a response. And Evie listened, her eyes fixed on the frost beginning to spiderweb across the window pane, the voice in her ear confirming what she already knew: the clock on Megan's unpaid bill was running out. The email landed in Megan's inbox at 7:42 a.m. Its subject line in all caps, final notice, payment past due. She sat cross-legged on her unmade bed, the glow from her laptop washing her face pale. The amount due seemed bigger now, bloated by late fees that had been quietly stacking up while she told herself she'd figure it out. Her phone buzzed with a reminder notification from the university's student portal. Well placed. Registration restricted until balance paid. She clicked through in a panic, only to see the red banner at the top of her account, the block permanent until every cent was cleared. By mid-morning her frustration boiled over. She filmed herself in the dorm bathroom, red-eyed and clutching a wad of tissues, the fluorescent light making her look sickly. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, she said to the camera, her voice breaking. I've worked so hard, and now the school's basically kicking me out because of some messed up payment issue my own grandmother caused. She posted it to her social media with captions that dripped accusation. Family is supposed to help you, not ruin your life. Back at the lake house, Evie didn't see the video, but Janice did. She walked in holding her phone like it was a piece of bad fish. You haven't lived until you've been the villain in your granddaughter's melodrama, Janice said, setting her phone down and pulling a stack of envelopes from her tote. But you have lived until you've gotten mail like this. The envelopes were from the scholarship students, handwritten notes, some with photos tucked inside. Evie opened one and found a smiling young woman in pale blue scrubs, standing in what looked like a hospital supply room. The letter was short but heartfelt. This scholarship means I can finish my degree without dropping my clinical hours. Thank you for believing in me. Evie felt her chest warm as she read another, this one from a single father balancing night classes with raising a toddler. The scent of ink and paper filled the room as she stacked them neatly, each one a reminder that her money was where it mattered. Let's put them where you can see them every day, Janice said, fetching magnets from a drawer. They filled the refrigerator door until it looked like a patchwork quilt of gratitude, smiling faces, neat cursive, bright snapshots from hospital wards and study lounges. The next morning, a dusting of snow covered the shoreline. Evie was pouring coffee when her phone rang, Clara's name flashing on the screen. Morning, Clara, Evie said, cradling the mug in one hand. Clara's voice was careful, deliberate. Evie, you should hear this from me before it gets to you some other way. Megan's been in touch with the registrar's office. She's trying to withdraw from the university mid-semester. Evie's fingers stilled on the mug. To avoid paying. That's the impression I got, Clara said. She seems to think that if she drops out now the balance disappears. But, Clara hesitated, letting the weight of her next words settle. It doesn't work like that. Evie turned to look at the fridge, at all those smiling faces. The steam from her coffee curled in the cold light of morning, and she knew Megan was about to learn another expensive truth. Clara's voice was crisp. No room for misunderstanding. I told her directly, Evie. Withdrawal doesn't erase the balance. She'll owe the full tuition for the semester whether she attends or not. Evie sat at her desk, morning light spilling across the polished wood, glinting off the silver paperweight shaped like a lighthouse. And how did she take that news? Poorly, Clara said. There was swearing, and a threat to take it up with higher management, which I think meant me. Evie allowed herself a small dry laugh. Well, at least she's consistent. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time it was Megan, her voice raw, stripped of the venom it had carried in recent weeks. Grandma, please, she started, skipping any greeting. I'll never be able to pay this off. I can't take out a loan. I can't get a job that covers this. I don't know what to do. Evie rested her elbows on the desk, looking out toward the lake. Thin ice still clung stubbornly to the edges, cracking in soft snaps as the water underneath moved. You'll figure something out, she said gently. Please, Megan's voice cracked. I'm begging you, just this once. If you pay this, I'll... Evie cut her off softly. No, Megan, just this once is how it starts. The silence that followed was heavy, but Evie didn't fill it. Eventually, there was a sharp breath and the faint click of the call ending. When Janice arrived that afternoon, she found Evie lacing her walking shoes. Lakefront? Janice asked. Lakefront, Evie confirmed. The air outside was brisk, carrying the faint metallic tang of melting ice. The sound of gulls echoed overhead as they followed the curve of the shoreline. A few hardy joggers passed, their breath visible in the cold. Janice talked about a new pie recipe she wanted to try. Evie listened, letting the rhythm of her friend's voice and the crunch of gravel underfoot pull her out of the morning's tension. By the time they returned, the sun was dipping low, painting the lake in bruised purples and golds. Evie hung her coat, feeling lighter than she had when they'd set out. Her laptop chimed from the study. She sat down and opened her email. At the top of her inbox, from Laura Carson, subject, "This is getting ridiculous." The email itself was a masterpiece of passive aggression, paragraphs about family responsibility and how hurt Megan is, couched in polite phrasing but laced with accusation. Evie read the first 2 lines, then hit delete. She didn't even bother moving it to a folder for later. She was still leaning back in her chair when the phone rang again. Martin's name lit the display. "Evening, Martin," she said. "Evie," he began, "given everything that's happened, especially the forged signature and the trust being closed, I think it's time we updated your will." She tilted her head. "Updated how?" "I'll explain in detail when you come in," he said. "But I think we both know some names should come out entirely." Evie's gaze drifted toward the refrigerator, where the thank you photos from the scholarship students covered every inch of space. The laughter in their faces looked nothing like the desperation in Megan's. "All right," she said at last. "Set an appointment." The morning air in Madison carried a sharp bite as Evie stepped out of her car on King Street. From the sidewalk, she could see the Capitol dome glinting pale gold in the weak winter sun. Martin Keller's office sat in the shadow of the building, a narrow, dignified structure with a brass door handle worn smooth by decades of clients making decisions they couldn't take back. Inside, the reception area smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. Martin's assistant greeted her with the warmth of someone who knew she wasn't there for casual conversation. "He's ready for you, Mrs. Carson." Martin's office was as she remembered, dark wood shelves heavy with law books, a desk that looked carved from a single slab of oak, and tall windows framing the Capitol's marble columns. He stood as she entered, offering a handshake before gesturing to the leather chair opposite his. "I've drafted the changes we discussed," he said, sliding a thick folder toward her. His tone was matter-of-fact, but there was a gravity to the way he set the papers down, as if they carried more weight than their pages suggested. Evie opened the folder. The words were precise, unambiguous. Megan Carson's name, once listed in several provisions, was now absent. In its place were two beneficiaries, the Evelyn M. Carson Nursing Scholarship Fund and Janice Riley. "You're certain about this?" Martin asked, his gaze steady. "Certain enough to sign it today," she replied, her voice without hesitation. He nodded and passed her a pen. The tip scratched over the paper with a sound that felt final, each stroke drawing a line between what had been and what would be. They moved on to the executor instructions. Martin read through the updates, liquidating certain assets upon her death, transferring her lakefront home to the scholarship fund to be sold, ensuring Janice received a bequest large enough to live comfortably without worry. "This guarantees," Martin said, "that there's no ambiguity. No one can challenge the will on the grounds of oversight or intent." Evie met his eyes. "Good. I'm not leaving doors open for someone who's already tried to pick the locks." When she signed the last page, Martin gathered the documents, clipped them neatly, and stood. "I'll have these filed before the day's out. You'll get your copy for your records by the end of the week." As she walked out into the crisp air, she felt the oddest sensation, lighter, almost buoyant, as if she'd just set down a heavy suitcase she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The Capitol's dome gleamed above her, solid and untouchable, and she thought, "That's how my affairs are now. Solid. Untouchable." Back at the lake house, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the frozen shoreline. Evie hung her coat, set her purse on the hall table, and was halfway to the kitchen when the phone rang. The caller ID read Clara Jennings. "Evie," Clara began, her voice tinged with the kind of tension that meant news, immediate and unwelcome, was coming. "I just got an alert on the credit bureau feed. Megan took out a private loan this morning. Very high interest rate. Honestly, it's the kind of loan people only agree to when they're cornered." Evie's fingers tightened slightly around the receiver. "How high?" "Into the 20s, Clara said flatly. "If she misses even one payment, the penalties will eat her alive." Evie looked toward the window where the ice on the lake was breaking into jagged shards, drifting away from the shore. The ink on Megan's loan agreement had barely dried when the first payment notice landed in her inbox. No grace period, no time to breathe, just a cold, neat line of numbers in black and red. She stared at it in her dorm room, the radiator clanking unevenly against the early March chill. Interest had already started nibbling at the edges, and the total due by the end of the month made her stomach clench. Within hours she was on social media, posting a close-up of the bill with a caption in jagged all-caps font, "When family turns their back, banks bury you." Another post followed, a selfie of her frowning into the camera with a latte in hand, the words, "Guess I'll be living on caffeine until this debt is gone." Back at the lake house, Evie didn't see the posts firsthand, but she didn't have to. Janice read them aloud over the phone that afternoon, pausing for emphasis on the most melodramatic parts. "She's got quite the knack for framing herself as the tragic heroine," Janice remarked dryly. 2 days later, Laura called. Her tone was polite, but there was a sharpness under it, like a smile stretched too tight. "She's barely keeping her head above water, Mom. If you'd just help her for one semester." Evie was sitting at her kitchen counter, steam rising from her tea. "No, Laura. It's not about spoiling her. It's about keeping her afloat. She chose the loan," Evie said, her voice calm, "and now she has to choose how to pay it." The silence on the other end was thick enough to feel. Then Laura sighed, muttered "fine," and hung up. Later that week, Janice stopped by with a glossy travel brochure tucked under her arm. "You need a change of scenery," she declared. "What about this?" She unfolded the page to reveal a fall foliage train tour, rolling hills, red and gold trees, white linen dining cars. Evie traced a finger over the photo of the train winding past a lake. Tempting. They spent the afternoon at the dining table, the air rich with the scent of coffee and cinnamon rolls from the bakery, flipping through trip options. Janice lobbied for one that passed through Vermont. Evie leaned toward a route that kept her closer to Wisconsin's lakes and forests. That Sunday, Evie treated herself to brunch at a cafe on the lakefront. The place smelled of fresh pastries and maple syrup, and sunlight streamed through the big windows, turning the snow outside into a glittering sheet. She lingered over poached eggs and toast, watching skaters on the ice before it melted completely for spring. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from Megan. No greeting, just a screenshot of her loan bill, the amount due circled in digital red. Underneath, "This is what your silence is costing me." Evie locked the screen without replying. That evening, as the sky turned the color of bruised plums, her phone rang again. Clara's voice was steady, but there was a flicker of disbelief in it. "Evie, I just got an alert from the bank. Megan missed her first loan payment." Evie stood at the window, looking out over the lake where the ice had finally started to break into floating shards. Somewhere in the distance, a single gull called out over the water. The loan company didn't wait. By the time Megan logged in to check her balance, a fat block of red text glared at her. "Late payment. Fee added." The number below it looked even worse, swollen with penalties. The payment she'd missed by 3 days had grown teeth, and now it was biting into her bank account. She clicked to see the breakdown: interest, late fees, and a stern warning that another missed payment would be reported to the credit bureaus. She felt her stomach twist. The report came faster than she expected. A week later, her credit score dropped like a stone. She stared at the number on her phone, scrolling up and down as if it might change with persistence. It didn't. In the cafeteria, whispers followed her. She caught fragments: "Loan, can't pay," cut off by her own grandmother. A few friends stopped texting back altogether. The silence stung almost more than the gossip. Back at the lake house, Evie heard none of it directly. What she did hear was Laura's voice, tight with frustration over the phone. "She's drowning, Mom. You've made your point. Can't you just help her catch up?" Evie sat in her sunroom, the morning light spilling across her lap, a knitting project resting in her hands. "No, Laura. This is between her and her bank. You're acting like this is just some lesson," Laura said, her tone sharp. "It's her life." "It is," Evie agreed evenly. "Which is why she needs to live it, and handle what comes with it." Laura's sigh was long, but she didn't push further. That evening, Janice came over with a bottle of Riesling and a grin. She kicked off her boots at the door. "To peace and quiet," she said, pouring 2 glasses and lifting hers toward Evie. Evie clinked her glass lightly against Janice's. "And to keeping it that way." They sat at the kitchen table, the smell of lemon cleaner faint in the air, the lake outside glowing silver under the moon. They spoke of everything except Megan, gardening plans, the stubborn raccoon that kept getting into Janice's garbage, the possibility of that fall train trip. Later, when the dishes were washed and Janice had gone home, Evie lingered in the quiet. She walked into the study to put away her knitting, and noticed the blinking light on her answering machine. Pressing play, she heard Martin's voice, warm, but with a certain excitement beneath the professionalism. "Evie, I wanted to be the first to tell you. The scholarship fund has officially reached full endowment. The university is preparing an announcement in your name. This means your legacy there is now permanent, untouchable, and self-sustaining. Call me when you get this." Evie stood still, her gaze drifting toward the framed photos on the bookshelf, smiling nursing students from past thank you notes, Janice at her retirement party, and one of herself in her crisp white nurse's cap decades ago. The loan company might have Megan in their sights, but Evie had just secured something no one could take from her. The envelope from the University of Wisconsin arrived on thick cream paper, the kind that carried weight before you even opened it. Evie slid it neatly with her silver letter opener, the faint scent of ink rising as she unfolded the letter. "We are pleased to invite you to the dedication of the Evelyn M. Carson Nursing Scholarship Fund." Her eyes moved over the date, the time, the note about refreshments to follow. There would be an unveiling, it said, a plaque to be mounted permanently in the School of Nursing's main hall. When she told Janice, her friend's grin spread slow and wide. "You know I'll be there. We'll wear our best and look like trouble." On the day of the ceremony, Madison was all crisp air and bright blue sky, the kind that made the Capitol dome gleam like it had been polished overnight. The School of Nursing lobby was warm, smelling faintly of coffee and fresh flowers. Rows of folding chairs faced a small stage, where a podium stood beside a velvet-draped stand hiding the plaque. Evie took her seat in the front row, Janice beside her in a deep green coat that set off her silver hair. Martin was there too, standing off to the side with his hands in his pockets, watching her with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen this from the planning stages. A dean spoke first words about dedication, service, and the impact of nurses who gave not just their skills but their hearts. Then she turned toward Evie, inviting her up. As Evie stepped onto the stage, the room's applause rose and swelled, a sound that felt warm in her chest. She reached for the velvet cover and pulled it back. The plaque gleamed under the lobby lights, her name etched deep and certain: Evelyn Carson, RN, for her lifelong commitment to nursing and the education of those who follow in her footsteps. She felt Janice's presence just behind her shoulder, steady as always. "Looks good on you," Janice murmured when they returned to their seats. Photos were taken, Evie with the dean, with the first group of scholarship recipients, with Janice laughing beside her. The event wound down into mingling and coffee, the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting from the refreshment table. By the time she got home, the university's photographer had already posted the album online. It didn't take long for the photos to travel. Megan saw them within hours, shared by a mutual friend on Facebook. She stared at the image of her grandmother, smiling beside a bronze plaque, surrounded by nursing students in their uniforms. The caption read, "Celebrating the permanent endowment of the Evelyn Carson Nursing Scholarship." Megan's thumb hovered over her phone screen, but she didn't comment, not publicly. Laura saw them too. She didn't call. She didn't text. Her silence was its own kind of statement. Evie, for her part, didn't check for reactions. She stood in her kitchen later that night, the smell of chamomile tea curling up from her mug, and let the pride settle deep in her bones. This was what she wanted her name tied to. Not a bank account someone felt entitled to. Not a grudgingly given check, but something that would outlive her and still be helping people long after Megan had stopped rolling her eyes at family dinners. She was carrying her mug into the living room when she saw it. A glossy envelope slid through the mail slot. She bent to pick it up. The return address was a travel company in Vermont. Inside was a brochure rich with autumn colors, deep reds, golds, oranges, and the crisp white of a train cutting through the foliage. Across the top, in bold serif letters, "Fall Foliage Express, a scenic journey through the season's splendor." Evie stood at the window, the lake dark and still outside, the brochure open in her hands. The brochure sat on her desk for 2 days before Evie picked up the phone. The woman on the other end of the line spoke in a cheerful lilt, clicking away at a keyboard as Evie confirmed the dates, the dining car option, and a window seat in the observation car. When she hung up, she dialed Janice. "Pack something warm," Evie said. "For what?" "A week on the Fall Foliage Express, leaves, lakes, and no one asking us for money." Janice's laugh was a burst of pure delight. "I'm in, I'll bring the scarves." The trip came quicker than they expected. The morning they boarded, the air was crisp enough to sting the lungs. The train station smelled faintly of diesel and roasted coffee from a kiosk at the far end. Their porter ushered them to their seats, wide, plush, and facing windows that stretched nearly to the ceiling. As the train pulled away, Madison's skyline slipped behind them, replaced by rolling farmland broken by stands of maple and oak already burning with reds and golds. The rhythmic sway of the car was hypnotic, the rails singing their low, steady song beneath them. Janice kept pointing things out: an old red barn with a collapsed roof, a herd of deer grazing at the edge of a soybean field, a church steeple just visible over a hill. Evie let her voice wash over her like a familiar melody, sipping hot tea from a paper cup. Halfway through the journey, a dining car attendant brought lunch: roast chicken, potatoes, and thick slices of apple pie. The scent of cinnamon mingled with the faint metallic tang of the train's brakes as they slowed through a curve. Between courses, Evie pulled a small stack of envelopes from her bag. They were new thank you letters from the latest scholarship recipients. 3 handwritten, 1 typed on university letterhead, all full of gratitude. One photo showed a young man in green scrubs, holding up his first stethoscope. Another was from a young woman posing in a hospital hallway, her hair tucked neatly under a surgical cap. The words they'd written spoke of relief, of doors opened, of futures reclaimed. Janice leaned over to look at the photos. You know, she said softly, they're your real legacy. Not the money, not even the plaque. These people, they'll carry you forward. Evie didn't reply right away. She looked out the window, where the train skirted the edge of a glassy lake reflecting the riot of autumn trees around it. Her hand went to her chest without thinking. A habit formed in the weeks after her hospital stay, but there was no sound now, no faint mechanical beat to remind her of fragility. Her doctor had pronounced her heart strong again, though he'd warned her not to forget how close she'd come. In the seat across from her, Janice was unwrapping a peppermint. You're quiet, she said. I'm thinking about echoes, Evie said. Janice tilted her head. Echoes, some sounds fade, Evie murmured, still watching the blaze of leaves rushing by. Others echo in the lives you choose to change. The train curved again, and the sun caught the windows just right, spilling warm light across her lap. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting it sink in, the quiet steady in her bones.